I keep messing with the lights. It's what they do in Hollywood. So now I've got to talk about the biggest part of this unbelievable obsession that the RCC has always had with the Jews. Okay? But I have to first define the kind of obsession it is. It isn't racial. I mean, Satan's behind that. But the people involved in this don't intend to be satanic, obviously. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, gee, I'd like to be anti-God today. Okay? This is a game that Satan plays on all of us. And one of the biggest characteristics of Christianity, not just the Roman Catholics, but Christianity in general, is anti-Semitism. And I'm not talking about a racial anti-Semitism, although it's there. I'm talking about this sense of replacing the Jews. Replacement theology is held by Roman Catholicism and by Calvinism and by most other denominations. Okay, they make fun of dispensationalism. The reason they do is that dispensationalism is Jewish. Okay, the 6,000 years that Hippolytus and Julius Africanus were trying to get rid of are Jewish in origin. Origen was trying to get rid of it too, and Hippolytus ended up getting rid of Origen. Okay, I talked about that in the earlier episode. He betrayed him. That's it. That's how Peter became Pope on a list, in order to betray Origen, so they couldn't get ordained in Rome. I'm sorry, that's the Robert Lee Williams book. You know, go read it yourself. Okay, that I didn't know. That was really a surprise. But the 6,000 year thing, I also didn't know that they were arguing with. The Jews have this thing, you can look it up on the internet. Age of Desolation, Age of Torah, each 2,000 years. The actual Bible period is 2,100 years. And I've spent 4 years now documenting it in videos. So you feel free to look at any of the 5 playlists I've got on the topic. That's what this Bible Hebrew meter is all about. And it's 2,100 years, 2,100 years. And then the Jews were speculating when the temple went down that there was a third 2,000 years that belonged to Messiah, and he would come at the end. Now the Jews have their calendar completely screwed up. We're in like the 6,119th year from Adam, from his fall. The Bible dates the calendar from Adam's fall in solar years. The Roman Catholics never got the calendar right because they patterned it after the Jewish calendar. Like I said, they're completely obsessed with Judaism. To them, Judaism is a competitor. It's not racial, it's political. Everything with the Roman Catholic Church has always been political, still is. Everything, the way they talk and all the ways they define themselves, everything with them is gaining the world, being political, making a show, being nice, see how many good deeds we do. That's pagan culture. That was Roman culture in particular, Roman pagan culture. And lock, stock, and barrel, all of it was adopted by the Roman Catholic Church. Before they were the Roman Catholic Church. They were born as Roman Catholic under Constantine, not before. Okay, and that's what the Robert Lee Williams book also proves. Okay, so it's a political war, always has been a political war in the minds of this group of Christians who we now call Roman Catholics. They have always targeted themselves against the Jews as a political adversary. Okay, and they ended up having that same attitude toward anybody who disagreed with them, which, you know, is witnessed in our 1,000 years of bloody history under the Roman Catholic Church. I'm sorry. I mean, you can just Google Catholic persecution. Take your pick. You know, just go look up the laws from 311 to 364 AD at 4thcentury.com. They're real nice for about 2 years, and then they steadily persecute the Jews, persecute Christians who disagree with Rome's position, and of course, you know, against pagans. And it's all the things that Diocletian did to Christians. All the things of the Diocletian persecution, the so-called Roman Catholic Church adopted lock, stock, and barrel and hit everybody else with it. So they're no better than Diocletian. I'm sorry, it's the truth. It's history. And I've been documenting it now since, December 2010, when I found out that Paul was making an issue of this in his meter. So, this obsession with the Jews is the heart of Catholicism as a political struggle. And they use certain terms to stress it. And every single church father has in his writings really nasty little tracts against the Jews. Okay, so apparently they felt that they were being followed or something. it doesn't even matter. They have persecuted the Jews and they want to replace the Jews, and replacement theology is the cornerstone of Catholic doctrine. Their own terms for it, translated in English, is New Israel. I didn't know that until I read this book by Robert Lee Williams, and I went and looked it up in the Church Fathers. All I saw was a lot of nasty tracts. Every single church father writes really scurrilous, disgusting things against the Jews. Calls them all kinds of names, makes up all kinds of lies about them. But then they made up lies about James and John and Mary and Peter. So why not make up lies against the Jews? Like Tom Lehrer sings in his song, my folks hate your folks, and your folks hate my folks, and my folks don't like the friends of your folks, but everybody hates the Jews. It's called National Brotherhood Week. You can get it from Fun Swede in YouTube. I'm a big Tom Lehrer fan. That's it. Now, replacement theology essentially denies that the Jews have a future. Okay? The theology says that everything, the church now goes all the way back to Abraham's tent. And as I said in that earlier video, if you go back to Abraham's tent, you better do what Abraham did. Abraham believed in the Lord, and it was credited to his account as righteousness. Genesis 15:6. End of story. There's no bishop that has to say anything over you as you're dying. You don't go to a priest. Abraham went to God. So do you. Abraham went to Melchizedek, not Israel. Okay? We don't come from Israel. It's a separate kingship. But of course, if you're anti-Semitic and you want to wipe out the Jews because they're your competitors, you're going to take all those promises that God gave them, like 900 different promises in the Old Testament, and say, oh no, we inherit them instead. It's disgusting. So Abraham gets cut out, Daniel gets cut out, King David gets cut out. All the Old Testament believers, all those promises God made to them, are now supposed to be inherited by church. Church is the new Israel. And that was the theme and the purpose of Eusebius' final list under Constantine after the Diocletian persecution. That was his whole theme, which of course it was under Hippolytus, except Hippolytus was trying to get at Origen, and under Julius Africanus by way of sort of inference, and before him by Irenaeus, and before him by Hegesippus, who started his list based on Jewish or not Jewish. You see that? So it has a definite pattern of development. If you say that the Jews are cut out of the inheritance, you're ignoring Romans 11, which was said to who? The Romans, which were what? Anti-Semitic. Read it. God punishes anti-Semitism, Genesis 12, 15, and 17. And Christendom doesn't care. That's why Catholicism is incompetent in its theology. It's in the playpen. It had to argue whether God was one or three. Hello, you can look up at 2 Corinthians 13, 14 and know that immediately. You can look it up in Genesis 1 where the Trinity are introduced and know that immediately. You don't need a council. You need the Bible. But, Bible's not good enough for them. And for the next 200 years, easily, Constantine, then his kids, then the successors, because Constantine only lasted 2 generations, then the successors after Constantine, they all fought with each other inside the Circus Maximus and outside, killing each other. raising armies. The Arians versus the Trinitarians. Killing each other by the thousands. And it kept on going for about 1,000 years. I mean, there were other elements that got added in after that. But that first 200 years, it was all about Trinity or not. And people killed each other over that. So nobody's looking at the Bible. Okay? If someone's stupid enough to not know that God is, Father, Son, and Spirit, if they're so damn dumb they don't know that, walk away. God will deal with them. You don't need to kill a person. Oh, but see, Roman Catholicism is political, and it started out by trying to fight against the Jews and all these other Christians that they didn't like. Especially the Jews. The history of Catholic persecution of the Jews is very well documented. You want books on it, I'll tell you. The first one coming to my mind is Atlas of Bible and Christianity, edited by Tim Bugdowley. The main purpose of that book is just to show church history on a map. But two of the pages in that map, I want to say it's 14 and 15, might be 26, 27, shows the pattern of persecution by the Roman Catholic Church of the Jews. They were just shunned out from one place to the next. That's where Hitler got his idea. And of course, it's the same pattern that Diocletian used against Christians. All because, this is a cornerstone now, the theology that these so-called church fathers developed from Justin Martyr with his dialogue with Trypho, all the way over, alleged dialogue with Trypho, all the way forward. The Jews are bad, the Jews are Christ killers, the Jews can't think, they're horrible, blah, 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 blah. We're the new Israel, we take over. Israel was Christ killer, so we're holy. Never mind, we've killed Christ many more times than they ever could. That was only one generation, and that was really only a few leaders. And everybody else just caved in. Yeah. They didn't do it for 1,000 years, but we have. So the whole thing, the darkest part of this, is the centerpiece of that Pope list and everything else that the Roman Catholic Church adopted. They adopted their style of priesthood based halfway on Diocletian's Oriental monarchy, with the pointy shoes and the jewels and the scepter and the meter and the whole bit. That was all Diocletian. He adopted all that. The Jews didn't have that stuff. So the Romans took it up from Diocletian. Okay, and the other half with the hierarchy of the Sanhedrin and, the lower levels and the scribes and blah, 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 that whole bureaucracy, that was Jewish. It wasn't anywhere near as striated as it is in the Roman Catholic Church. The striation came from Diocletian. So, that's the price of anti-Semitism. Is that you are killing in the name of God, and you are disobeying the Bible that you're not reading. They didn't read Romans 13. That says everybody has a right to determine his own fate. They didn't read Romans 11, which says don't make the mistake that the Jews made. They didn't read Romans 9 and Romans 2 and Romans 4, which says, are you stealing? Are you doing the same thing that you accuse in others? They didn't read the book of Hebrews at all, which explained that the Old Testament priesthood was abrogated and instead went back to an earlier priesthood, Melchizedek, which didn't have any of the trappings of the Roman Catholic Church at all. The guy was a king who happened to operate like a priest in the days of a family priesthood. And he was basically doing it for his whole, area. And the book of Hebrews explains that, chapters 5 through 10. Which no Roman Catholic has obviously ever read. They're too busy chasing the Jews. And all their holidays, they covered up Pesach, when Christ died, by calling it Easter. And really, Good Friday, which is really Good Wednesday, and Easter. So they covered up the nature, the fulfillment of Jewish prophecy to the Jews, and then, kill the Jews. And on top of that, all those promises in the Old Testament, you don't get them. God can't keep his word to you. We get them. And all of Calvinism and all of Roman Catholicism and most other so-called ecumenical denominations, they all share that view. It's not just the Roman Catholics. The Orthodox share it. The Methodists share it. Anybody who's not dispensational. And there are very few dispensationalists. Dispensationalism is Jewish. That's why. Okay? And of course, this is reflected in other ways. They stopped learning the Hebrew. Augustine and Jerome were arguing. Augustine didn't want Jerome retranslating the Bible from the Hebrew. It's in NOTderive, letters, I want to say 402 and following. I can give you the links in one of my other videos. Because that would renew arguments with the Jews. That's why Origen and later Augustine argued away Revelation as if it was allegorical. Those weren't the first two to do it. And every single church father, just read them, they have diatribes against the Jews. Diatribes. So, that culminates in, we're going to ignore 70% of the Old Testament. We're going to ignore the entire book of Revelation, Ephesians 2, all of Hebrews, 1 Corinthians 13, 14, Romans 13, 14. Romans 9 through 11. We're just going to ignore all that Bible because we want to say that we're the new Israel. You know how many wannabe Jews are out there today? I'm trying to widen the scope of how important this is. Okay, it's not just the Roman Catholics. I happen to have to do videos on them right now, but it's not just them. You got the JWs, they can't read Revelation 7 if their lives depended on it. Harold Camping was big on church replaces Israel. Yeah, look what God did to him. Okay, his was a mishmash of both sides. But that's the thing, is that the latter rain, and he too thought that Revelation 7 applied to Christians. God, I don't even know how you can think that. Okay? You got the wannabe Jews in the Hebrew Roots movement. Oh boy, that's a bunch of weirdos if ever there were a bunch of weirdos. Hi, we're using Hebrew words so that makes us holy. We're saying Yeshua instead of Jesus, so we're more holy. Oh, please. Knowing a word in a language doesn't make you more holy than the next guy, okay? Feels good to say the words because those were words in the Bible. That's a thrill. But it doesn't make you better than the next guy. So the Hebrew Roots movement, the whole thing, just throw it out. Bunch of wannabe Jews. Of course, then you got Christian identity and the Mormons. The Mormons think that they're the true Israel. That they got the covenant instead. Everybody wants to be a Jew and replace the Jews. So obviously, there's a God, and he's the God of Israel. This fixation is unbelievable. But I just didn't know the Catholic Church had it so at the foundation, at the very foundation of all their doctrines. The formation of the priesthood, the formation of the pope list, the kinds of holidays that they use, the way they rename the holidays, their structure as a priesthood, with the hierarchy, calling themselves New Israel, saying that they replace they inherit all the promises instead of the Jews. And of course Calvin, you can read his commentary on Daniel 9, Calvin thought that he was going to inherit instead of the Roman Catholic Church. So he believed that they're the whore in Revelation 17, and that Calvinism would triumph over them in Revelation 17. So Calvin was cutting out the Jews. Preterism cuts out the Jews. It does. Eschatology means that there's a future for the Jews. Christ will return, resume, regather Israel, just like he promises in Ezekiel 37, That's a Second Advent passage. Doesn't apply today. Dead bones means dead people. So it means that the Old Testament people are resurrected. Duh. Okay? So all these wannabe Jews and all these we're the real Israel, they'll never grow up. They'll stay retarded until they die. And so will Catholicism. It always has been. It's the most retarded religion almost on the planet. And it's incompetent, as hopefully you've begun to see. This is why. If you focus against the Jews, then you're focusing against God. It doesn't matter that they are themselves apostate largely. How largely is anybody's guess, but there are a lot of messianic sects in Judaism who hold to the New Testament, and even if they don't, they believe Christ is the Messiah, so they're saved. Okay? If you fight against them, whether they're believers or not, whether they agree with you doctrinally or not, God's going to kill you. And He's going to do it slowly. First takes your mind, makes you go nuts, or, lets you go nuts, really, because you got to be nuts to be anti-Semitic. He lets you go nuts, and then your body slowly disintegrates. I've seen it happen in people in my own family. That's how come I can talk about it so authoritatively. So that's the number one problem that underscores all of what's wrong with Catholicism, is it's intense, institutionalized. All their doctrines are founded on anti-Semitism. All their doctrines are founded on replacing the Jews. And they call themselves a new Israel. That's not my term. And you can read their writings and see for yourself. And, I would like to be wrong. Because you're talking about 1 billion people, not counting the Calvinists yet, who are founding themselves on an anti-Semitic doctrine, which makes them just as bad as the Muslims. Really. And their history is just as bloody, too, against the Jews. Does that mean that we should, that the Jews are perfect and everything they do is right? No. What it means is, leave it in God's hands. What it means is, you have a new covenant. That's the theme of the book of Hebrews. Our covenant is way higher than theirs, way better than theirs, and of course the meaning of that is all lost to the Catholics. They have no idea what it is. Because they're too busy, defending the past. They're still living in, Constantine's day. And they have no idea what the Bible has to say about how high and how great our covenant is. Let me tell you something. I can say, and I've done it too, and I'm pretty surprised at the results. I can say to God, I want Russia broken up. And I did do that in 1984. And in 1991, on my birthday, that's when Gorbachev was put under house arrest. And Russia was broken up as a result. I wouldn't have known that if I wasn't stuck in a hotel room, because I wasn't watching TV in those days. That's the only reason I knew about it, because there was the TV. I was stuck in a hotel room. What else was I going to do? And I prayed for the terrorists to get killed, the leaders. And you say, you're praying for them to get killed, yeah? Praying for them to get killed. See the difference? Praying, not slaying. Praying. In other words, when you pray, you go to God and you ask Him for something. And then it's God who says yes or no. So God agreed. David prayed for the slaying of his enemies too. He prayed for it. And he waited until the Urim and Thummim, the little lighted stones that were on the ephod of the priest, and they lit up to tell him what to do. God's answer in front of everybody, so everybody knew it had to be from God. I mean, stones don't light up on their own. They didn't have electricity in those days. Okay, David waited until God replied before he did any slaying, and he did a lot of it. See? Praying, not slaying. If you're in military, you're in law enforcement, you are supposed to kill. It's your job, and it's not wrong. It's called defense of your country. It's called serving your country. Okay, But I am not in the military, am I? So I pray to God. God, defeat our enemies. It's not right. Those terrorists are going to kill 200, 300, 400, 500 innocent people. Kill them. It's the only right thing to do. And God said yes. He said yes. Gaddafi's gone. Ha ha. He said yes. Bin Laden's gone. Ha ha. And their number 2s are gone. And, different places around the world. See? Now, why did I tell you all that story? Because as a brain out, you're just as much a brain out as me. I'm not better than you. I think I'm one of the worst persons who ever lived. But you don't have to be good. Christ is the one who's good. You're asking in the Son's name. It's based on His goodness. I can go to the throne of grace, Romans 5:1. Now, if anybody can ask anything in His name and He'll do it, and there are 4 verses in the Gospels where Christ says you can do that. Carte blanche. And you don't ask, but you try to do it yourself, then you settle for a mess of pottage, honey. Now that's far bigger than Israel ever got. That's what I was leading up to. You and I are just average Joe Blow people, or worse than average, who cares? Oh, we have some skeletons in our closet, fine, so what? You could be a drunk in Calcutta, you believe in Christ, you use 1 John 1:9, you ask God for something, He'll do it. Christ didn't put any conditions on those prayers. He didn't say you have to be good. He said, ask anything in my name and I will do it. That's it. Ask. That's the condition. So instead of running around being at a lower priesthood where they're busy doing junk, like the Jews had to do, you and I, in the higher New Covenant priesthood, only have to ask. Praying, not slaying. But the Roman Catholic Church was busy slaying. They were busy writing all these tomes against their enemies. They were political. They were agitating. They went to Constantine against the Donatists. They went to Constantine against the Arians. And then the Arians went to Constantine against the Trinitarians. And in 334 AD, Constantine switched from being Trinitarian to Arian. And then Constantine's sons, I think 2 of them were Trinitarian or 1, and the other 2 were Arian, and they fought with each other and killed each other over this. So they weren't asking. They had a higher priesthood and they didn't even know. And of course everybody was killing the Jews. All kinds of Jewish scriptures were burnt. That we could have had many more copies of the Hebrew Old Testament and the commentaries on them. But oh no, they're Jews, they're dirty. Instead of asking God, if the Jews were so dirty, why didn't you just go to God in prayer and say, kill them? He wouldn't have done it, but that's the protocol you should have followed. See, we have a higher job in here. In here. Not out here. Christ saved us by thinking on the cross. Isaiah 53:11. That's harder and higher. It's easy enough to hand some money to somebody. Not so easy to keep your thoughts toward God 24/7. What am I thinking? Is this as good a thought as I can have? Am I really applying the doctrine right here? I really don't know enough about that Mary doctrine. I better go study. It's hard. Controlling your thoughts is hard. He had to control his thoughts on the cross so he wouldn't sin. But of course, Roman Catholicism is too dumb to live. They think he died physically for your sins. See the problem? This is what anti-Semitism buys. It buys puerile theology and the people who are, that they're already being punished. They don't know anything about what the spiritual life really is. So they huff and puff and huff and puff and light candles and, move beads and sprinkle incense and don their clothes, and they have to remember what's a surplice and what's a meter, and they have these jeweled shoes just like Diocletian had. That's a hassle to get dressed up like that. Besides, you look like you're gay. In the very colors of Revelation 17. It's a tiring life to live. And there's no blessing at the end. At the end of your life, you realize you wasted it all simply because you didn't read your Bible.